Let me begin by introducing you to the first page of my book. It's called Spring. Love. On a bright May morning in 1996, I fell in love with Ellen Monteau. I was 13 and she was a senior student at Smallwood High. I had been invited to the senior classroom to report on a book I had read called Gone with the Wind. Sitting in the front row was the most beautiful human being I had ever seen. Other students slouched in their desks, ignored me, did homework. Someone hissed, "Shut up, Rhett Butler." But when I finished my book report, distinct applause came from her desk. The bell rang, and 20 students barreled past me out the door. The title tells it all. Gone with the Wind, she said breezily. She wafted towards me, and the warm sunlight followed her, trapped in her blonde hair. To me, she looked about 8 feet tall. She wore a pleated plaid skirt and white cotton blouse with frills across the breast. "Thank you," I croaked. "It is truly divine." 5 minutes of bliss followed as the voice, which had acquired a slight southern accent, discussed the book. Atlanta burned. A civilization died before me, but I heard only her sweet voice, perhaps from Tara. Behind me, several light years away, I heard another voice. "That was a fine job, Felix. You must have enjoyed the book very much," said the teacher. When I turned back, my vision from Dixie had disappeared into the Atlanta smoke. Sigh. Out in the bumpy, tussling corridor of student bodies, Tammy Fagan was the first familiar face. "Who's the movie star in 11A?" I asked. Tammy shifted her books to her skinny hip and her gum to the other side of her mouth. "That would be Ellen Monteau. Aroused, are we, Felix? Ha ha. You'll be studying wet dreams and family living next year." She chortled, clutched her books to her skinny chest, and went on her way. Who is Ellen Monteau? I needed to speak to Monk. Outside the library door, Victoria Spaulding was standing on a chair, stapling a sign to a wall. She was on tiptoes, reaching high over her head and hammering a staple gun with her fist. I pretended not to notice her pleated skirt riding high up over the backs of her legs. "Just a minute, Felix." I slunk by. "Felix, come here." She was the student president and head cheerleader at Smallwood High. She looked down at me. "What grade are you in?" 9, I said. "Your class is allowed to attend the basketball game Friday night." "But that goes on too late." "I know. Mr. Banyan will be contacting parents to let them know you're allowed. Isn't that wonderful?" "It was the student council's idea." She turned back to her sign. I found Monk in the library. "The council needs the money," he said. $2 a head times 60 grade 9s makes $120. Letting in your class puts them back in the black. Monk's real name was Jerome Banyan. We called him Monk because he spent every free minute alone in the library, like an old monk transcribing Greek into Latin. He was grossly overweight and sat atop his library chair like a frog on a mushroom. Monk remembered everything he read or heard. He'd moved to Curlew from some private school in Ontario, and I often wondered why his father had taken his family to Newfoundland. And where was Mrs. Banyan? And I bet a divorce court was involved. Kids didn't like Monk, and no one spoke to him unless they had to. But I felt a small kinship because my father was a mainlander too, from Alberta. Monk knew everything. He could recite verbatim telephone conversations between his father and the school superintendent. "I need to talk to you about something else," I said. His watery eyes moved up from the book in front of him. His chins jiggled as he shifted to a more comfortable position on his mushroom. Who is Ellen Monteau? Well-developed blonde, room 11A, straight-A student, lives with her mother in Petley, my kind of girl, he concluded with a smile. His big head was already lowering back to his book. Sure is pretty, I said. Somewhat of a checkered past, though. What do you mean? Information was Monk's currency. With it, he bought what little interaction he had with other human beings. Something about her mother. What? Monk looked at me, then looked around the room. He pulled his chair closer to mine. Okay, I'll tell you. The mother went to St. John's as a secretary years ago and came home pregnant. That was Ellen. They lived with the grandmother until the old lady died a few years ago. She must have left them the trailer. The mother drinks a lot, and there are men. Men? Men. You'll do it next year in family living. I know, along with wet dreams. You're a bit young to be talking like that, aren't you? He said. Well, that'll give you a clue to the main character of my book, Felix Ryan. Young, figuring out what it's all about, and he just fell in love.